We're so close yet so far away.
We're just following the rules.
Exactly.
We're following the
Good.
rules. So thank you, everybody, for coming, for staying, especially after lunch. I know that's a time where people tend to drift off, but we'll try and keep your attention here for 30 minutes. So here we are, and we're ready to talk about criminal justice reform, which is a subject that's been in the press a lot recently, of course, but it's also been a policies issue that's really been being considered and being pushed through at the state level and the federal level for really the majority of the past 10 years, led by conservative states, but now everyone's kind of joining the party because it's not only the cool thing to do, but it's the safe thing to do, it's the fiscally responsible thing to do. You check all the boxes. So we're very happy to be here today to talk about this great subject. We have a panel of some incredible people who have really been in the trenches in this work and have seen from every which angle the best way to get things done, the best way to get things implemented, and what actually works. So instead of me going through and talking about all these people, they probably know themselves a little better than myself. So I will let them give a quick intro on who they are, where they work, and what really has brought them to the table on this issue. And we will start right next to me with Louis, actually.
I was actually going to hope that you started in the middle. I was raised by my grandmama, and anytime a woman is in the room, you always defer to the woman. So
I feel very special today.
And I just hope my mom is not watching, because I'll get a call. But Mercedes.
Oh, you're so kind. Thank you, Louis.
You're
Seriously,
welcome.
That's so kind. Well, I had the great honor for 2 years to work with President Trump in the White House. And I was there during the time that criminal justice reform legislation was being debated in Congress, and it passed. And let me tell you, it was a remarkable moment, because we got to understand what's happening here in Congress, and that's that they get nothing done. So for them to achieve this piece of legislation, it was because of President Trump's commitment and leadership, bypassing any sort of Democrat or Republican ideology and saying what is the right thing to do for those people, those nonviolent offenders whose sentencing is ridiculous. And we really did need real change and real reform in this space.
Louis.
Oh, thank you.
It's your turn, Louis.
Yes, it is my turn.
Now you got to talk.
Yeah. So my name is Louis L. Reed. I'm the national organizer for hashtag Cut 50. Cut 50 is a bipartisan criminal justice initiative of the Dream Corps. We're also co-founded by Jessica Jackson, who worked tirelessly on the First Step Act, as well as Van Jones, who worked just as tirelessly on the First Step Act. The reason why the issue of criminal justice is, I think, very relative and very imperative to me is because I served almost 14 years in federal prison. And while I was incarcerated, there was one of three things that happened with me. First and foremost, I had a spiritual recalibration where I accepted the redemptive principles of Christ into my life. The second thing that happened, amen. The second thing that happened with me is that an education passport opened up for me, where I was able to matriculate through university and go on to earn a couple of degrees, and I'm a licensed clinician in the state of Connecticut. But the third thing that happened with me is that I was exposed to a notion that I wish I would have adopted, but it comes from my mentor, Glenn E. Martin, who talks about those being closest to the problem are also closest to the solution, but often furthest from resources and power. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to keep that righteous indignation that I had inside of my spirit and continue to fight the power once I was released. Hence the reason why I'm here with you today talking about my experience and talking about the value that I add to the space of criminal justice reform.
And last but not least, Michael Jahr from the Badger Institute.
Thank you. It's great to be here. The Badger Institute is a free market-oriented public policy research institution. We do reporting and analysis of basically policy ideas that are going to benefit the people of Wisconsin. What's going to help people to prosper? And that's what we look at. We really got involved in the criminal justice issue in large part because we really think it makes sense. All the things that we believe in as free market and conservatives really align with criminal justice reform. So if you look at Albert Walker, who was here just a few minutes ago on the stage, he exemplifies everything that I think we believe as conservatives. We believe in redemption. We believe in justice. We believe in the dignity of work. We believe in small government. We believe in fiscal responsibility, and all of these. We believe in the benefits of a strong family, and all of these elements come together in criminal justice reform. All of these areas can be touched by criminal justice reform. So that's our involvement at this point, and it really is about changing and transforming lives in a way that benefits all of us here in Wisconsin.
Great. Well, thank you all, and I guess I'll do a quick introduction for myself. My name's Patrick Plein. I work with the American Conservative Union Foundation and the Nolan Center for Justice, which is a program that we look at the justice system start to finish and figure out why it's not working and give really conservative-oriented solutions on ways to make it work. At the end of the day, as Michael mentioned, the criminal justice program or system is a government program. It's run by the government, either state government or federal government. It doesn't work well, I guess, in terms of if you're looking at recidivism rates. You have folks who are coming in to a Department of Corrections that's not doing much correcting, and then they're letting you out with not much opportunity, no new education, not many new skills. You may still have your drug addiction, alcohol addiction, whatever issue you may have had that led you there. If you're warehoused and then let back out in the community, what can we realistically expect to happen? And that's where I think the First Step Act was something that really sent a national kind of viewpoint of, look, this isn't working, and this is a first step towards what we can do to make things better. So I want to go to you, Mercedes, because you were obviously with the president when this was being considered. And it was signed in December 2018, but it was under consideration, and folks were having discussions about it on Capitol Hill for, 10 years, 15 years earlier, because that's the speed of Congress. But it did get done. So Mercedes, when this proposal was going through Congress and folks were talking about this, and it was looking like something that, this is going to happen one way or the other, this is a real discussion, what was the president's kind of mindset in approaching this, and why did he get to the point where he was fully supportive and became a champion of these issues?
Well, I have to tell you, the president was very open-minded. It was really a Jared Kushner initiative. I remember Jared bringing us together and saying, we're going to get this legislation done. And I, being in politics for a long time, I was like, wait a second, we've got Mitch McConnell, a Senate Majority Leader. He's not going to let this happen. Like, he's just not going to. I mean, we had Republicans some of these Republicans who felt very strongly that this was not the right direction, and they didn't want to spend time on this law, on this legislation. So it really took Jared to keep talking to the president, showing him the facts, saying the recidivism rates are so high. We need major sentencing reform. We need to make sure that when individuals are getting out of jail, that these offenders are able to then get training that they need in order to re-enter society and re-enter the workforce. You see so many of these cases where people get out of jail and they don't know where to go. And so it really was, I would say, bringing multiple departments in, whether it be the Department of Justice, the Department of Education, to be part of figuring out what we can do to provide the resources for these nonviolent offenders. How can we make sure that people who are in jail are treated right? I mean, we saw the cases where women who were giving birth were being shackled, or they weren't getting what they needed. And so the key was to ensure that, look, every life matters, and that we have to ensure, especially when we saw during this 1994 crime bill that Joe Biden supported, that led to the mass incarceration of many Black Americans, especially Black men, that was not going to work anymore, that has caused devastation in the Black community, and that we needed to have fundamental change. And it really was because Jared insisted with the president, basically through facts, saying, Mr. President, this is a good issue. This is an issue that passes party line, that bypasses party lines. We can get Democrats and Republicans on board. We've seen it work in states like Texas and Georgia. Let's make these national changes that we know is much needed in our judicial system. And because of the president's leadership and open-mindedness, really, again, listening to conservatives that cared about this issue, like ACU, listening to the Van Jones of the world as well, who met with the president, and of course, Kim Kardashian, who, by the way, is like 5 feet tall and like the tiniest person I've ever met in my life. Because of those influencers, it really made a difference, and the president knew that this was a right cause to champion, and it's why he really took it to the finish line and called Mitch McConnell and say, let's get this thing done, and they were able to get it accomplished.
Absolutely. And as somebody that was working in policy before President Trump and now during his tenure, I think there was a common sense, or at least a general worry when President Trump got elected about what is going to happen to criminal justice. Obviously, the platform was law and order, and law and order is obviously an important issue, but at the same time, he understood and he saw a system that just wasn't working. And as we've seen with other things that he's approached, if something's not working, he steps in and he fixes it. And I want to go to you, Louis, because you were obviously in the building and talking with senators and folks on the Hill about what this does and what you're hearing in the community. And as somebody that's active in the community, what are people looking for? What are the issues now that after we've got this momentum, what do we want to see? What are people still looking for in terms of fixing the system to make it more equitable for everybody involved?
Yeah, so I just want to stretch out something that Mercedes talked about. In the First Step Act, I just want to quantify this for our audience. Within the First Step Act to date, in less than 2 years, that one bill alone has freed more than 13,000 people from federal incarceration. So when you that deserves a round of applause. And so when you quantify those numbers, that's more than 150,000 years of human freedom back into our communities, back into our workforces, back at our tables, within our families, restitching the fabric of who we are as Americans. And one of the things that I realize in my advocacy for the First Step Act is this. Look, Republicans at their best believe in liberty. Democrats at their best believe in justice. And Americans at all of our best should be believing in liberty and justice for all people. Irrespective to whether or not you are black, irrespective to whether or not you are white or you are green, it doesn't matter. We should have a fair and equitable American legal system, period. And so what does that mean as it relates to the question that you just asked, Patrick? Where do we go from here? I think that COVID, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Philando Castile, the First Step Act, ad infinitum, all of that has taught us something, that we have to be better than what we were before. Mm-hmm. We have to show up better than what we were before. Look, right before I came over here, I was, reading my Bible a little bit, and I was thinking about, I was actually reading the situation of the Good Samaritan. And the interesting thing about the Good Samaritan is that the Good Samaritan actually got off of his high horse and got down and was touched by the feelings of the infirmity of the individual who was hurting. As Americans, I personally think that what we need to do is we need to step outside of our space of privilege. We need to step outside of our silos of our political silos and our economic silos, et cetera, and we need to reach across the aisle to make sure that the people who are hurting by the criminal legal system specifically are more buoyant than they were prior to them being incarcerated. And then last but not least, I'll also say this. Our criminal justice system, particularly our Department of Corrections, is the only institution in government that we reward for misbehavior. Think about this. They get rewarded annually for incarcerating people at an exponential rate. And if that was standard business practices, they would have actually been bankrupted, right? So think about it. If I am incarcerated on a Friday, if I'm released on a Monday, and if I'm returned back to incarceration on that Tuesday with two of my friends, the Department of Corrections actually gets more in their budget at the end of the year because I returned with more people. And essentially what we have to do is we have to have a system where we are not rewarding corrections, or we're not rewarding state or government institutions for failure. And that's where we go from here. That's how we are going to be better than we were before.
Absolutely. So going down the path of being better and leading a more equitable justice system, we saw Texas and Georgia and many deep red states really start the push towards justice reform. And it really started with former Governor Rick Perry in Texas when his legislature came up to him and said, Governor, we need $2 billion because we need to build prisons. And he said, you're not getting $2 billion. You're going to figure out how to continue operating the system without an extra $2 billion influx of cash. And they did. They figured you either have to slow people down on the front end, you have to speed people up on the back end, and you have to make sure people aren't coming back. And that system was, through all sorts of drug courts and different sentencing and making sure folks in Department of Corrections were receiving training, that worked. It worked exponentially well. Texas has closed 8 or 9 prisons, potentially more, since 2009, and their crime rate is at the lowest level since 1968. So we know criminal justice reform works. Obviously, it's how you do it. And I think the president signaling, especially to red states, that, look, this is a safe political issue and it's a smart issue. It's an issue that needs to be taken head on. And I want to go to you, Michael, because I think Wisconsin is starting to get that memo, but so far we haven't seen the level of reform that we've seen in even some neighboring states. So what is your kind of outlook on where Wisconsin is and what Wisconsin can do moving forward to achieve the similar goals that we've seen both at the federal level and in many neighboring states?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. We're really kind of behind the curve here in Wisconsin. Our prisons are more than maxed out. We have a prison system that's designed for about 17,000 inmates, and we have close to 24,000 inmates living in that system. We have another 65,000 people who are on probation or extended supervision on the opposite end. And while Texas and Michigan and so many of these other states are closing prisons and saving money, we in Wisconsin are talking about building a new prison. $500 million probably to build a new maximum security prison, and that wouldn't even begin to alleviate the problems that we have. We have a couple of older prisons in our system. We just can't keep going that route, especially given our COVID economy. There's just not the money going to be there to build a new prison. So we have to look to other states to see what have they done that's worked. How have they saved money? How have they closed prisons? How have they kept the crime rate down? How have they got people into transition and diversionary programs rather than into cells? And that's really what we need to do here in Wisconsin. And I think, too, as conservatives, we quite often recognize that government doesn't do a lot of things well, especially the further it is from the problem. But we kind of assume that it does, for some reason, in the corrections world. And that's just not the case. We need to kind of reshape our thinking in terms of what's the best way to address these issues. There are so many fantastic civil society organizations in Wisconsin alone that are having an impact and changing lives and helping people like Albert Walker or Marty Calderon this morning, who did the invocation. Marty's got a housing program in Wisconsin, in Milwaukee, that's dealing with men who are coming out of either addiction or coming out of the prison system. He's providing housing. He's requiring that they work because we know that that work changes lives and it brings dignity. And he's also requiring them to participate in some sort of faith-based regular weekly program. So it really is a way to transform lives, and that is far more effective than saying, okay, government, we want to throw a bunch of money at you, we want to build a bunch of buildings, we want to put people behind bars, and hope that somehow changes things. It's just not going to work.
Sure. And so, Mercedes, I want to go back to you because I want to look forward and see what we can do. Obviously, looking back at what we haven't done is only helpful for so long, but actually looking forward with real solutions is how we make the change and get done what we want to get done. Right after the president signed the First Step Act, maybe that day, maybe the next day, he was already saying, what are we going to do for the second step? What can we do to further correct this issue that has really gone so far the wrong direction that this first step is just that, a first step? What are the president's next priorities in this field?
Well, I think you'll see a lot more of what the president's vision is as for the next 4 years, actually in the next few weeks, where he'll be talking about several of these issues. But I think for the most part, we want to make sure this is working. I think this idea of vocational education, vocational training, getting individuals back on their feet when they're getting out of prison is critical. And there is definitely a sense, especially for these faith-based organizations that are such a part of helping them do this. So I think you're going to start seeing more and more of what, the necessary funding, and I think you'll see that in his budget, on what we can do to make sure that we're helping those who have the drug addictions, making sure that we have the resources for vocational training and the job skills that they need. Some of these individuals to Lewis's point, I mean, being in for 14, 20 years, it's hard to then get back into society if you don't have the skill base that's necessary. I remember when we were in CPAC prison, and let me tell you, it was really a remarkable experience. It was the first time an organization had gone into a prison with it was how many men? It was about 150
about
men.
150 people.
And having an opportunity to give them the advice, Lewis, that you gave them, and the skills. Van Jones was there, which was interesting to watch Van Jones, the liberal, and Matt Schlapp sitting together, the conservative, but they shared the same value, which is that these lives matter. Don't get me wrong. The real bad guys, they'll stay behind bars forever. I'm saying these nonviolent offenders who deserve a second chance at life and an opportunity to reincorporate themselves into society. I will tell you, I think one of the reasons why I became very passionate about this issue was my 16-year-old at the time was reading Just Mercy. And I highly recommend you to read that book. It's by Brian Stevenson. I don't know if he's a liberal, I don't know if he's a conservative, I don't care. It tells the story of people who were wrongfully accused and thrown into jail for life, and how he tried every single day to get these people out of jail. Or the 14-year-old that was sentenced to life, a 14-year-old. And so it tells the horror stories to help you understand that we have to have a compassionate heart, that we need to find a way to make a system that's a true system of justice, and that we're able to be a voice for those individuals who deserve a second chance in our society. So I think you're going to still continue to see the president being a champion for criminal justice reform. I think he understands that we need to still continue to make significant changes, and really, we want to see a lot of these states implement these changes. I know we just saw some in North Carolina, and we want to be able to make not only the changes at the federal level, but most importantly at the state level as well.
Absolutely, and I will second the recommendation on Just Mercy. And if you're more of a movie person like myself, it's also a feature film now, so you can go that route, save yourself a few hours. We only have a couple minutes left here, so I want to start with you, Michael, and go down the line really quickly. What gives you hope on this issue moving forward? What are you looking for that gives you hope that we are going to move this pendulum back in the right direction going forward?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of reasons to be hopeful. One is what we've talked about a little bit here, and that is the bipartisan nature of this. If you look at almost any issue in front of government at the federal level, at the state level, where do you find bipartisan agreement? Almost on almost no issue at all. This is the one place where people are coming together, right and left, of people of faith and people with no faith, to say we've got to do better in this area. I'm also encouraged by the number of civil society organizations that I think are really stepping into this and finding creative and innovative and humanitarian ways to change lives and to bring about change in a way that's really going to have a lasting impact.
Mercedes?
Well, I think what inspires me is Lewis's story, because we have to have faith in our humanity. We have to have faith in those individuals that we know can do great work once they get out of jail. And so I think, it is part of understanding of putting ourselves in other people's shoes and understanding that, we want them to have a better life. We want them to succeed. We want them to be able to be reunited with their families. I know one of the issues that I was talking to Lewis about was women in prison. When they are so nervous that they're caught in a situation, they end up in jail, it was a nonviolent crime. They're in jail for 5, 10 years, and they know they have to leave their kids. They don't know where they're going to leave their kids, to whom they're going to leave their kids. And it is such an enormous amount of stress for so many of these women. And those women prisons, they do not even get the resources that the male prisons, that the men prisons get. So, that's something that I would like to see more action in, something that we need to be more vocal about to help these women prisoners or offenders be able to then get out of jail, reunite with their families, and have a fresh start at life. And we've seen the president take actions by commuting many of those sentences for these women. Some great stories. Alicia Johnson being one of them. And if you didn't see the Super Bowl ad, look it up. Those are the great stories that we know that change lives. And now they're huge advocates for the work that President Trump has done in this space of criminal justice reform.
All right, Lewis, take us home. What gives you hope?
Yeah, so there are several things that give me hope. This conversation gives me hope. that someone who is closely connected with Van Jones, and who self-identifies as being as far left as Pluto, who can be on the same stage with Mercedes Schlapp. And I think that there is a degree of humanity right here in the center of us. There are a few other things that give us hope as well, and I know that we have to wrap. There are more than 70 million people in the United States of America who have criminal convictions. With one felony conviction, just one, there are more than 46,000 collateral consequences of one conviction. Essentially what that means is that you can't get a job. That means that you can't get access to state licensure and or certification. You can't get housing. So what are you expected to do? There are also more than 2.2 million people in our prisons and jails nationwide. That is 2.2 million people too much. And yeah, there are some bad guys. Yeah, there's some bad girls who, probably you can make the argument that they should be incarcerated. But we need to de-incarcerate the United States of America, period, point blank. And what gives me hope is not just this conversation, but I think that the spirit and the fervor that is in the eyes of every person that is watching this broadcast and the people who are applauding to the points that we are making, you guys are going to make the difference, irrespective to whether or not you are Republican, whether or not you are Democrat, whether or not you are independent, or you haven't found your way yet. We are going to make a difference in the United States of America, and we will reduce our national prison population.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Another hand for all these amazing people. And you can go to conservativejusticereform.com to learn more. That's where ACU's Criminal Justice Project is housed. And thank you all again for coming out here. Stay safe, stay healthy, wear your mask, wash your hands, all that fun stuff.